Hi, everyone. Welcome to the panel on building authentic brand experiences. My name is Elena Bajic. I'm the founder and CEO of Ivy Exec. And today we're going to talk about authentic brands, why they matter, and how to build them. In today's fragmented media world, where we're getting pulled in 100 different directions all the time, even today, as we watch these panels, we're all checking our emails and Twitter feeds, making Pedro happy, and other social channels. It's become critical for brands to really present an authentic narrative that resonates emotionally with their customers. And although this time represents some challenges, it also represents great opportunities for brands to express their narrative in more authentic and innovative ways. So I'm delighted to introduce our panel. Each one of our panelists has contributed to creating or shaping some of the most authentic brands of today. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
So I'll start from here. We have Sam Baum of Red Bull. We have Alejandro Betancourt of P&G. And we have Pedro Porto of Twitter Latin America. Welcome. So before we get started, could maybe each one of you tell me briefly what you consider an authentic brand? What does that word or that term mean to you?
I think that when it comes to what authentic brand means is if you're really taking the combination of what your product does and what you as a company are trying to say, together that's where you're really creating that identity. And then finding ways to share that connects genuinely with who you're trying to connect with for a consumer. That's what I would say.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I guess I'd say an authentic brand has three things that set it apart. First, that's a relatable brand. From a value standpoint, you can relate to that brand, you feel that the values are shared, and therefore that creates an authentic experience. The second thing is that brand communicates in a non-intrusive way. It's impossible to create authentic and positive brand experiences when that's done in an intrusive manner. And the third thing is it's a consistent brand. And often consistency is mistaken for identity. And those are two different concepts, right? So consistency is all about staying true to what the brand is, even if that comes to life in different ways in different countries, especially when you have multicultural markets or multi-country regions like Latin America.
Great. Yeah, just to add on that, personally, I feel that it's a combination about having a deep knowledge on who you are, because every brand was born for a specific reason, and sometimes we get a little bit rid of what is happening, what you were born for. So deeply understanding who you are, your perspective in life, like how do you see life, and what is the benefit, what is the value you're bringing to people's lives. When you could align all of these three things, then you can be really authentic. Otherwise, you're following the tides, or you're following the trends, or you're following something else, but not truly who you are and what kind of value you're bringing to people on the other side.
Great, thank you. So if I'm a brand manager, why should I care about building an authentic brand? What does it do for my customers? Or maybe if I don't have an authentic brand, what does that not do for my customers? What is the loss of not having one and the benefit of having one, in your point of view? Whoever would like.
So it's a very good question. I guess when you look at the data of what's happening today from a user standpoint, and again, I think all brands want to create the best consumer experience possible and an authentic consumer experience. When you look at the data, 7 out of 10 people are telling us that they are annoyed by ads and the way that the brands communicate. And not only that, that is a symptom of a bigger problem that is arising. 30% of users are already using ad blockers. And that is growing at a double-digit pace year on year. So whenever the brand does not communicate in an authentic manner, based on, again, the three concepts that I just described and for my personal opinion on the topic, I think we just risk losing it all. I mean, from the very beginning of being able to communicate with our consumers and being able to reach out and serve advertising and communicate in a way that we believe will improve the lives of those consumers, we're risking a big deal if we don't do that in an authentic way and respectful of creating a superior consumer experience.
Yeah, I think that there's such an importance for differentiation at this point between brands. There's so many the competition is so high, and it's a fact that consumers have expectations from companies now. They don't see companies just as someone who provides a product. They see companies that are expected to deliver things to them, whether that's just the product, but also things within the political realm and within the activism realm. And if you don't have a real identity, something that you're trying to say that can connect with the consumer, they're going to make the choice to go with somebody that will. And this is really an expectation of a modern consumer. And it comes from all of the different avenues that consumers have to connect with not only brands and companies, but also individuals. This is something that we see happening in the same case of celebrities, where celebrities are brands and even individuals are brands. And that's because there's so many social platforms which people are delivering their identity, and companies have to participate in the same way. This is just the way that society connects today.
So, Sam, you mentioned that the expectations are different now. Do you also think that has anything to do with the new generations, the millennials, the Gen Zs, and their values? Or do you think it's mostly related to the social platforms and kind of how we deliver the message today?
I think it's a combination of both, right? Because how much different generations are engaging with these identity-based social platforms is dramatic, right? I think that between Gen X and Gen Z, and then the millennials in the middle, some people live their entire lives on social media. How much time they spend is astounding. But even someone who's deeper into Gen X and even a little bit older with some of the some baby boomers, they're still seeing it somehow or another, right? It's hard to turn on the news and not see information about tweets and Instagram posts. So that's definitely impacting the way it is. But the more connectivity, the more opportunity there is to see that identity, and the ability for people to also dive into the internet and find out more information. The necessity for a transparent brand identity is more important than ever.
Great, thank you. Pedro, what are your thoughts?
I'll jump back to the other question, because I feel that we'll link to this one. I feel that when you look where we are right now, we're just overloaded. Like, it's just too much information everywhere and a lot of things to do. So I think in a world like this, it's really important to rethink what really matters. So when we talk about like people and we're trying to differentiate one brand to other, they have somehow the same products or close benefits, same price. What really matters for you? So when you think of, like, I can use Sam here, but like when I think about endless energy in a world that I'm overloaded, I think it's valuable. A lot of times I think it's super needed. When I think about coming back early to my house and not being really worried about doing laundry or other things, I understand the value of his brands. So being very clear about what are you promising and what kind of value are you bringing in this world that we're absolutely overloaded about everything, it's super important. So when you tie back to these audiences that we're saying is that it's super important to listen. Because we used to say a lot, we used to shout, we used to yell on people for the last 3 or 4 decades, and for a few years to now, we can just jump in on Twitter, for example, and just listen to what they're saying about your benefits, your products, what they want, their problems, and then tie our communication to solve their problems instead of having just a creative idea that, of course, it was always creative, but not always related to solve a specific problem. So I'll come back to value. I think in a world that we're absolutely overloaded, what kind of value are you providing on people's lives is absolutely the tipping point if they're going to choose you or others.
Great. So what I'm hearing is the message is important, but also how it's delivered is very important, and it seems to be changing pretty rapidly. So could you each give me some examples of how you deliver your message now that's different, how you're using this more, the not shouting way, but the whispering of your brand narrative to your customers?
So I can give you an example from Mexico. We just recently relaunched Secret, our deodorant brand in Mexico. And had we chosen a purely functionally driven strategy where we talk about, how it keeps you dry, et cetera, blah, 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 being the small player in the category, that would have That would have gotten us nowhere. Instead of that, what the team found was that there is a big movement driving gender equality in Mexico now. We got access to a gender survey that said things like 60% of women still think that they don't need to work unless it's essential from a financial standpoint, or that 50% of women have to ask for permission to their husbands to go out at night with their friends. So tapping into that reality and putting a social issue on the table and tackling that head on has been the narrative that Secret has used to relaunch the brand in Mexico behind just a tagline says, don't sweat progress, just alluding to those stress situations, which of course in the end is a deodorant, but really building the story from the point of view of putting the gender equality issues on the table. That's a different way to tell a story, compared to how we were telling stories 5, 10, 15 years ago.
So it's no longer just product-based, but you're really becoming an integral part of the dialogue of a community of what the topics are that your customers are thinking about.
Exactly. I mean, as much as we would love to have that, but people are not thinking about that deodorant 24 hours a day, right? But they do think about the problems that they have on the day-to-day. So if we can go and have that conversation and put that conversation on the table or spark conversations around that topic, I think we can be much more successful in creating that experience for the consumer.
Now, just as a counterpoint to that, and I think that is true and it's really important. I think that sometimes, especially with smaller brands that are still developing and creating an identity, there is sometimes the desire to go towards what some of the bigger, maybe more established brands that have the ability to continue to find new ways to have shared values that they as a company want to have with their desired consumer. But I think particularly with small companies that are still building that brand identity, I think it's important to sometimes stay core to what your product does and what you can do from like what you were talking about in terms of how do you showcase what the product actually does in more of a lifestyle way so it's connected back to the functionality and function of the product than to start jumping into things that may seem really dynamic and of the moment, particularly in the political situation we are in right now, like politics and social issues. So, it's important to start with a strong core brand identity and then expand those things as opposed to getting ahead of yourselves and then leaving what your product and its functionality actually delivers to the consumer because it's important to make sure that those two things stay connected with your brand and your product.
I think I can also add with a very particular point of view what happened inside Twitter in the last year. So we're a pretty young company, and as we all know, like the competition got absolutely increasingly like it was huge last year, like new platforms and everyone trying to jump in and understand what was happening, and then we have to come up and look inside the company to understand truly who we were. And what we found out, like researching and listening to people on Twitter, the way I told you before, is that we found out that we had what we call the most valuable audience when they're more receptive. Because when you jump on Twitter, you want to understand what's happening in the world in that moment. So understanding that, we changed our positioning to what is happening. So we understood that the right way to tell people what is Twitter is to tell them that Twitter is what is happening. And every time that you want to know or you want to connect with people on Twitter, on this audience, you should start with them, not saying, but listening and crafting a great content. Then you can connect to people with the best value on the right timing. But literally, we had to dig into our inner DNA to understand, because we are in a world right now where we have like a bunch of platforms, and what we found out is that these other platforms, all of them are saying, look at me. And what Twitter is saying is like, look at these. We're not pointing selfies to ourselves, we're saying this is happening in the world. And when we found out this difference, there was the tipping point, that was exactly the moment that we pivot our own positioning, telling people a best way to understand what Twitter is about.
That's great, thank you. So it sounds also like different brands, depending if they cater to a larger, more general customer base or more niche customer base, have different challenges in creating authenticity or different opportunities. Alex, you mentioned a few examples of how you've created authenticity with a brand that caters to a broader audience. Do you think that there are differences between niche brands and general brands and how they approach this question?
Yeah, so I mean, historically, we've been accompanying relatively larger brands. So I want to go back to what Sam was saying and give an example on how the core identity of the brand, and I mentioned at the beginning that authentic brands are consistent, not necessarily identical. So let me give you one example. On Pantene, a shampoo brand, in the US about 5 or 6 years ago, we launched our collection for the African American audience. So Pantene has always been about strong is beautiful, and we launched that campaign under the slogan, My Black is Beautiful, right? Paying homage to that audience and really catering to exactly their needs. If we had taken that into Latin America and just reapply it as we did in the US, it would have felt just tremendously disconnected. So what that truly was about was understanding the need and developing a proposal that was aimed at solving that problem. So in Brazil, over 60% of women have curly hair. And that is something that is widely celebrated by Brazilians. So we created a collection in Brazil that was, again, behind the story of strong is beautiful. But now, instead of doing something, My Black is Beautiful, which have made no sense in Brazil, it was much more oriented to the particular problem, the consumer problem that we were trying to solve in that country. So you got to be very careful when you have, particularly when you have larger brands, not to just go and try to force fit the proposal into every single market, particularly when we manage a multi-country region, because that may turn into rather, creating a disconnected brand experience rather than an authentic brand experience, because it would seem something, afar and alien from the reality of the market.
Yeah, I think that's actually also to both of these points in terms of brands being a mirror and taking it and adjusting it into not necessarily specifically a niche product, but really like a consumer by consumer in different markets, right? Twitter acting as a mirror, you adjusting the message around similar products or even developing new products. It's important to also not only think about that from a messaging perspective, but also you could take that into the people that you're working with. So you could be listening to your consumer, but you could also be listening to the creatives that you're working with when you're building and developing this brand identity in these kind of campaigns, right? I think an example that works in Miami is, right, there's between like a Cuban restaurant and a Honduran restaurant, there's gonna be different hot sauces, right? And it would be strange to have this one hot sauce from one place into another one, right? That's a very subtle, small difference. But unless you really were talking to that community, if you were spending time in those restaurants, having meetings potentially with those chefs, and you tried to put on a meeting and you cross these, people would they would notice it, right? They'd be like, something's out of place here. And that breeds a sense of inauthenticity if that was in a restaurant, or if you were doing the same kinds of things with trying to just put creative across the different markets for your brand. So when you're building these kinds of brand experiences, it's also not only important to listen to the consumers, but the creatives who will be able to pinpoint these kinds of nuanced differentiations that will be really able to be called out as inauthentic and have a bad example with your brand.
Great, thank you. Pedro, any thoughts?
I totally agree with both.
Okay, great. So storytelling, there's a lot of, is a topic in brand authenticity, and one that people are talking about a lot, and about the benefits of storytelling and creating an emotional response with your customers. Do any of you use storytelling in narrating? Alex, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we all do in different ways, but we all do. And I'm a lousy creative, so I can't talk on the creative side. But on the media side, there's just really a new way to look at storytelling. And back to my point of, a brand that tries to create an authentic experience will never be a brand that communicates in an intrusive manner. So when you think about the digital ecosystem today, the way to tell stories has dramatically changed. I mean, when we were in school, they would tell us stories are a combination of three things: images, sound, and the story itself. Well, today, depending on the ecosystem that you play in the digital arena, some of those stories are being told sound off. Because consumers tell us, you know what? It's just tremendously annoying that if I'm reading an article and then the advertising shows in between paragraphs, that goes sound on from the beginning. That's tremendously annoying. I don't want that. So think about the fact that from the 3 pillars of storytelling, you now count only with 2, because sound is gone. So really adapting and using new ways and partnering, we were just talking about that with our partners on TEEDS yesterday in a different audience, on how can we recreate the storytelling to ensure that once the message is right, that even the delivery helps create that positive atmosphere and does not create a rejection. So storytelling in itself, in essence, is and will continue to change with the advent of more and more digital media.
I will never feel that storytelling is an end itself. So it sounds slightly awkward when we speak about it, and it was something different than understanding what you need to say, what you want to say, and in the best way that people will understand that. So to me, even understanding all of these nuances and not just the banners, like these days, we don't want to put the sound on, even on the videos, like on social networks. So we moved from 30 seconds on TV and we're moving to 6 to 10 to 15 seconds without sound, because you don't want to be caught like listening to something in the middle of a meeting or in the bus or in the metro. So we know that the behavior changed. But what I really want to move, the direction I want to move is that this is not different on being meaningful in real life. You know who you want to talk. You know what you want to talk and what you want to listen, and to establish a conversation, a true, real, valuable conversation, you have to find out the best way to make it. So if you're creative, you're going to find a creative way. If you're like a tech person, you're going to find out a super interesting way to show how tech would be useful in their lives. If you're all about joy and fun, you're going to find a funny and enjoyable way to make it. I don't think it's different. I think storytelling is just like a new way to rebrand how you should be really concerned that people must understand what you want to say and be valuable to them. I think, again, it's about empathy. You need to know who's in the other side. You need to feel their shoes and say, this is the way I'm going to be valuable for this person. So change it with the platforms, change it a lot. It's going to change more? Yes. Do I know how it's going to be? No, I don't. But I think we're working together to make sure that we still can be meaningful. Coming back, brands are meaningful to people because their products or their services help people to do something better. This value will always be there. We have to find out the best way to be listened and to be valuable.
Yeah, and that point of being meaningful and going back to the concept of differentiation is it really comes down to an emotional connection, right? That's what someone's able to connect with via the brand versus via the product, right? And like a character in a movie, if they introduce some random character on the side and it has no backstories, they're just driving the plot. There's no connection between who you're watching, and you don't really care about what happens to them. But if there is a backstory, if you know more about that character, you're a lot more likely to root for them and get behind them and care about what happens to them in a film. And it's the same way with your brand. The more of the story that's there, the more ways that you can connect your brand with your consumer in an emotional way, the more they're going to care. And when it comes to making the choice in the end, which matters, between your product and someone else's product, if they have that emotional connection, they're going to choose your product.
Thank you. So we're going to take one of the questions from the audience. Sam, it's for you. How does Red Bull, first of all, I guess, does Red Bull partner with tech startup, and then how does it partner with tech startups to deliver cool experiences?
I think, so I don't really speak on behalf of what Red Bull does as a brand and the way that we connect with different companies. But I think that in terms of all brands connecting with different companies, it's always important to be looking forward to what's going on, not only because I think the brands are better when they are connecting with experts and innovators outside of what they do as a core product. That's where they should be looking for. I don't think that brands and companies need to try to be experts in everything. They should be looking to wherever they're trying to meet with their consumers, find people doing really interesting things within that space, find ways to collaborate, and continue to expand the dynamics of your brand via the different partners that you have. So, you know, I think that that's the best way that brands can work outside of sectors, whether it's tech, fashion, design, versus what their core is.
So a question for the entire panel. Building on this, do you look for partners, and is it important to pick partners that enhance your narrative, that share values with your brands? Is that something that you pay attention to?
Yes, otherwise for us it's not a partnership.
Okay.
The partnership itself is just built if both has the same objective or want to build the same stuff. If not, it's like it's just service. So through partnerships, the ones actually we have here in this stage, Alex is a super great partner. It's like when we truly understand what they have to build as brands, bringing value to people, and how do we can use Twitter to build this bridge, then it's a super real partnership. Otherwise, it's just service.
I'm totally there with what Pedro is giving. So if I had to pinpoint maybe 3 areas where it's very useful to get help in this process is you need someone or you want to partner with someone that provides unique insight into the pain points that your consumers or users are going through. So when we use partners to do social listening, it's a great way to understand what's going on, what's the narrative out there in their day-to-day lives. Again, when you have brands that people don't think about all day in their lives, right? I think once you have uncovered those insights, then the next stage is how do you craft a message that will resonate with that audience? So definitely looking out and back to Sam's point on the creatives and looking for the creative way to communicate that what you have uncovered as part of your listening and your research. That's another great opportunity to partner. And finally, last but definitely not least, partnering with people that can help you deliver that message in the most authentic and effective way is just fundamental. Because again, if you do great work in listening, you craft an amazing creative, and that doesn't get to a consumer, then the whole exercise is just useless. So I'd say those are the 3 things where we constantly look at partnering. Again, understanding via listening, crafting the best creative that addresses that need, and then partners who help us deliver that in the most authentic and effective way.
And that's actually maybe even more important now than ever because everyone's always talking about the role of influencers now. So brands, more than ever, are connecting with people in order to get their message out there. But those people aren't just platforms. Those people are individuals with their own views and perspectives on things. The way that they speak matters a lot. So, you can't just identify these kinds of influencers and partners based on how much reach they have or how specifically they're talking to the audience that you're trying to connect with. You also have to think about who they are as an individual and what their brand means, because that connection is going to become inextricably linked to your brand. So you have to really know who the people that your partnership are, what they represent, and the way that they represent these things, or else you're going to start carrying some of that with you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm going to use this hook because we have a specific company inside Twitter called Niche, and we don't even talk about these guys as influencers anymore. We talk about them as content creators, because the kind of content that they create should be absolutely aligned with the brand itself and the way, the best way to deliver that content or that interesting experience to the person on the other side. Because we're not buying audience. We have cheaper ways to make it. We're buying someone that is absolutely authentic, and it's going to help you to find the right approach to make your message come closer to someone that you want to speak to. And if you really think about them, not as a media platform, but the best content creators to deliver your message, then it's really a partnership.
Yeah, it's funny. It's because it's like that thing that they always put on, the views and messages of this person are not necessarily the views and messages of this platform. You're like, oh, yes, it is. You're putting it up there. I don't care what your warning says. That's the reality. So you better keep that in mind because your consumer's not reading the fine print. They're taking the message. They're connecting it to your brand.
What role do your customers play in shaping your brand narrative?
So you mean our consumers?
Yes.
Oh, I mean, a huge role. I mean, it's the narrative is built for them. So they are the beginning and the end, right? Because I mean, it starts. If you follow the logic that I was just describing, I mean, you start by listening to what's going on there and listening to them, and you use that as a raw material to then try to craft the creative or to try to build the experience, which ultimately is going to go back to that same people that you built it for. So there's absolutely not a bigger role in narrative creation than the one that the consumer plays. That would be the tweet that would describe that answer.
So do they get to actively participate? I'm thinking kind of social media, and I think that now conversations about brands are happening everywhere at all times, and some are not coming from the companies. And so do they have an influence throughout, not just the messaging is delivered for them and created based on their needs, but once the message is out there in real time, are they also impacting that conversation about a brand? And has that changed in recent years at all? And maybe Twitter has played a big role in that.
I was going to say that's your whole brand.
For you, man.
I would say that like the only message we say like very recently we start sharing with the brands and the advertising agencies and all the ecosystem around communication is literally hashtag start with them. That's what we have to say. Like if you really want to communicate and be meaningful to people, let's listen before and then create the message and reshape the message and adjust the message until we got the point that we know that we're being absolutely meaningful for them. So that's one specific point. And actually the area that I lead, it's called brand strategy. We partner with the agencies and the brands, and we have an internal mission that we say that what we do is we build human-centric ideas worth talking about. That's what we do. That's what we help people to do. So must be human-centric, otherwise we haven't started with them and we haven't listened what they want to get. Must be a creative idea, because otherwise they're not going to pay attention. And more than that, must be worth talking about. Otherwise, could be in any other platform or media and not in the one that people goes to start conversations. The moment we launch something, the game just started. 10 years ago, when you launch something, then you just get to see the KPIs at the end, to see like how many views you got. And right now, it's just starting, because that's when the conversation starts. That's when you have to take a look again in your communication and adapt, adjust, reshape, sometimes remove, and put a new campaign, because you found out that or you have the best message ever, or you have to reshape everything.
So I know some of this panel was sort of about experiential side of marketing, not just the brand side, and that's where you really have the biggest necessity of being able to connect with your consumer and have the consumer essentially become an advocate or an evangelist of your brand. Because when you're creating a brand experience, whether it's an event or other kinds of things that you can do to do experiential marketing, that's when you're really taking, hopefully, your target consumer, and you're really having them come deep into the space in a 360 way, and really connect in one time, in one moment, lots of different elements and parts of the brand identity. And those people, if you've done a good job, are going to leave that, and they're now going to be telling your story on their behalf, right? So whatever tools you give them to do that, either via the experience or the kinds of things that they take away from it, physically, digitally, they're going to be telling your story. So you better make sure that the people that you are inviting to those kinds of events are the right kind of people that you want representing your brand, because that's what they're going to become either way, if you've done your job right.
Thank you. So we're almost out of time. So very quickly, could each one of you share what you think is the future, or what lies ahead in the next few years for creating authentic brand experiences?
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
No, I can go. I think we have to go back to the basics, understanding that communication is partnering with someone else or sharing with someone else the best way that both can grow. That's how we do when we share with anyone. So when we remember what is this brand is about, what is my perspective of life, what kind of value I can bring to the other person on the other side, then I will be meaningful in any platform, any different KPI, any format, any great experience, remembering truly who I am and what kind of value I want to put on the table. Of course, as Sam said, a lot of times, the experience itself, the creativity itself, the way you shape the message, the way you differentiate, but never forgetting the real value into this sharing an experience.
I think I'd say, again, where I started, 3 things again. I think one is we will continue moving away from mass blast and getting into one-on-one personalization. At scale, we still need to cover a lot of people as a CPG, but we will try to do it as personalized as possible and trying to build that one-on-one relationship. Second, we're going to be using more of a combination of push and pull advertising, so that we don't talk at the consumer, we talk to the consumer and with the consumer, and we hear what they want, and we have them come for more content. And third, we highlight the values of the brands and what are the stances that each of our brands are taking in matters that are related to the lives of those consumers. So they can relate to that and they can decide whether the values that brands are communicating are a match to their own values or not. And that will ultimately mean whether they stay with the brand or not. So those 3 things.
I hope to see people, now that the generational shifts are happening so much, continuing to evolve with the way that they're messaging their brands, the way that they're speaking with their consumers, particularly as the Gen Z consumer has such a different profile than previous generations. I'd like to see the continuation of brands hopefully being a voice for good, as we're in such a dynamic social and political time that I'd like to see brands continue to take a stance, hopefully on the right side, which has been mostly the case, because these are the things that are important, and brands have the ability to speak at large to some of these things and really have a piece of mind share in that space. And I also believe that there's going to continue to be a more blurred breakdown of the brand experience in real time, in real life, via events and all the experiential marketing sides, and the way that you're able to connect those kinds of experiences digitally. So continue to expand in that place as well.
Great. Thank you so much to
Thank
the
you.
panel.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.